It's a regular season game that we haven't seen since before a man landed on the moon. That did eventually happen, as will this. So here to help us get ready for this one is Nick Osen from Badger 24/7 and Brian Abraham from USCFootball.com. We have two 2-1 teams looking for their first Big Ten win. Let's tell you a little bit more about this matchup because, as I said, again, we do not get it very frequently. The Trojans are 17-1 against unranked teams under Lincoln Riley, and for a Wisconsin win, well, they'll have to do it without their starting quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke, who tore his ACL against Alabama back in week 3. So it's Braden Locke with his first start going up against a revamped USC defense. Nick, let's start with what do we need to know about this new quarterback? Introduce us to him.
Absolutely, Emily. So the fortunate thing for Braden Locke is he actually got similar situations and experience last season. The starter, Tanner Mordecai, went down at the time. Now, obviously, it's Tyler Van Dyke. And I think that's really going to help him, with his confidence. And he talked about that a little bit earlier this week. A big thing for him is increasing some of his accuracy. He's only at about 50%, really last year and this season. But he's got a great grasp of Phil Longo's offense. He makes good decisions, good reads, maybe not as mobile as Tyler Van Dyke, but a really good leader as well. So I think if you get some of that accuracy up and the confidence continues to build, which some of his teammates have said too, I think that he'll be in a better spot than last season. Obviously, the bye week will help him tremendously. And USC's defense, though improved, is maybe not as tough of a unit that he saw at Alabama as well.
For USC, this is going to be the third week in a row they've faced the backup quarterback with Bryson Barnes for Utah State, and then Alex Orji comes in when Davis Ward gets benched, and now yet again. So they're used to kind of seeing this, but I think they're going to stick to their own game plan. They did a really nice job at about 95% of the snaps, Lincoln Riley said, outside of those 3 big runs for Michigan. So I think it's kind of business as usual, but they're used to seeing the backup quarterbacks at USC these last few weeks.
It makes the preparation just a little bit different when you're facing that backup. On the other side of things, not a backup for USC. Miller Moss and the USC offense, though, they showed some weaknesses, emphasis on the some at Michigan. So, Ryan, how do they get it corrected? And then also, what does the Wisconsin defense do to prepare? Ryan, let's start with the Trojans side of things.
Yeah, for Miller Moss, I think he was pretty good under duress in that Michigan game. And he was under duress quite a bit. And the USC offensive line just wasn't up to snuff. The PFF grades were a historic low. We've never seen them that bad for pass protection. And Lincoln Riley mixed things up a little bit in the second half. We're not sure what the offensive line is going to be, if Elijah Page is going to be in that starting lineup or not. But I think it all starts and ends there with the offensive line. He's still able to get rid of the ball and find those wide receivers, and they ran the ball a little bit better in the second half. But they really have to get that offensive line fixed. They're probably not going to see a better defensive line than that Michigan one they saw last weekend. So I think for Wisconsin, you just want to get after Miller Moss and pressure him just like Michigan was able to.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ryan. I've been impressed by Miller Moss, quite honestly, even against that impressive Michigan D-line. I felt like he had some moments. And I think for Wisconsin, it's going to be paramount probably to get some of the pass rush coming from the outside. Guys like Leon Lowry Jr., Darrell Peterson at outside linebacker. I think the defensive line has missed James Thompson Jr. at times. So I think kind of scheming things up a little bit, getting kind of some extra pressure. And I think, quite honestly, it's also going to fall on some of the corners. I think a guy like Rico Holman or Max Lofi to just add maybe some coverage pressure and coverage sacks, because we know that Moss can make quick reads and obviously loves to get it to a guy like Zach Branch in space. So I think eliminating some of those really early reads and quick passes and just getting in his face a little bit like they were able to do in Ann Arbor would be massive for this Wisconsin defense.
Yeah, Nick, we actually have several former players, the former defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch, on the Wisconsin sideline, a little bit of a revenge factor there. What are those guys, the former Trojans and Alex Grinch, thinking ahead of this one?
Yeah, this is a really kind of an interesting underlying story with this matchup. I can definitely speak on specifically the players because we got some time with them actually earlier this week. It was interesting. Both guys are approaching it really well with kind of the team first aspect. I think Tackett Curtis really kind of kept things, pretty quiet, pretty smooth with that. Didn't really add any fire, nor did CJ Williams. But I will say that it was very obvious and evident his excitement. He talked about how he had a couple of his best practices last week, and even his teammate Bryson Green noticed, just because there's always a little bit of excitement. I think it's a little different between the two players. Tackett Curtis was a starter for some of his time in USC, whereas Williams kind of went to the portal looking for some more time, and he's playing some of his best ball. So that'll be huge. And then for a guy like Alex Grinch, I think the key is just maybe learning from some of what he had seen and experienced prior, but also not letting that really overtake the USC kind of Wisconsin battle. But I will say, if they're able to go in and really make some noise individually, I think that'd be big for the team and the Badgers as a whole.
Certainly going to feel good if they're able to go in there and make some noise for some of those former Trojans. Ryan, on the other side, what did Lincoln Riley and company maybe learn after watching that tape from Michigan?
You know, I think when you hear from Lincoln Riley, he was critical of his own play calling late in the game. It seemed like a lot of things sort of had to go wrong. And you go into the big house with maybe your C game and still have a chance to win at the end. They're trying to be positive about this, that it was a very devastating loss, a heartbreaking loss. They could have started off their, Big Ten conference schedule and conference career with a bang and weren't able to get in that. But I think, even though they fell short, I think they felt pretty good about the way the defense has been playing. It traveled well. It played well in like most of the snaps outside of those 3 big runs they gave up. And then, I think it was disappointing to see the offense struggle like they did in the first half. But being able to bounce back, especially after that pick 6, seemed like it'd take all the momentum away. They kept fighting back. So I think this was a team, if you looked at the same roster last year, the same coaching staff they had last year, they're probably, losing by 3 or 4 touchdowns. So I think they're trying to take some positives away from this, knowing they can kind of get things right and get their first Big Ten win against Wisconsin and then kind of go on the road from there. But I think it's mostly been positive, but it's tough because they know they had a real chance at getting a historic win at Michigan, and they fell just short.
I love Lincoln Riley saying this week that we saw 47 runs, 43 of them, we looked like bosses, honestly. So definitely an improvement from last year. That was a fantastic quote to come out of this week. I mentioned that we have not seen this game played in the regular season since the mid to late 60s. So we were just too excited. We simulated it 20 times on EA College Football 25. And USC won it 18 of those 20 times. So we're going to get this from each team, but let's start with the virtual champs, USC. Ryan, what's the biggest key to pulling out a win in the real game?
I think they have to kind of play their game. With the defense we've seen do well against an LSU squad, Michigan, Utah State shutting them out. They've been able, that's traveled, that's worked against every opponent they've had, and they've really done a good job limiting the big plays outside of that Michigan game. So I think kind of get back to that script of, hey, you're going to be more bend but don't break, make it really hard for Wisconsin offense with a backup quarterback to move the ball, score points, and just don't give up those huge explosive plays. And I think on the offensive side, just kind of getting back to what they do well. Miller Moss spreading the ball out to a bunch of different guys. Woody Marks running really hard. I mean, he had one of the best plays of the year when he stripped the defensive tackle there for Michigan and got the ball back for USC. But I think really just kind of getting back to what they do well. You don't have to play outside of that. And they've done well on special teams. I think they played really good on defense. Maybe the offensive side is what needs to step up a little bit. But kind of play your game, and they should be okay against Wisconsin.
Yeah, similarly, Ryan and Emily, for the Badgers, I think it's doing what they do best. And I think offensively, we saw against Alabama the propensity to run the ball a little bit. I think obviously Michigan showed that you can do that against USC. I'm sure the defense will make some tweaks and maybe some schematic changes within the week as well out there in LA. But I think leaning on one of the most experienced offensive lines in the country with at least 2 or 3 future pros kind of at those bookend tackle positions will be really key for the Badgers. I expect a pretty good game from Oklahoma running back transfer Tawi Walker, potentially Cade Yakimelli is that change of pace running back at times. And defensively, it's really simply to make Miller Moss uncomfortable. I think he's smart. I think he's talented, good arm, makes really good decisions. And I think Mike Tressel certainly is excited for this challenge, especially coming off the bye. But they've got to get a little bit creative because if you give Moss and that offense time, I think the Trojans can find success. And I see the Badgers doing those first couple things that I mentioned for a pretty competitive game out in Los Angeles.
I love it. For the second straight week, USC is featured in the CBS Sports Game of the Week, hosting Wisconsin. Super excited about this one. Thank you both so much for the great breakdowns. Be sure to check out Badger 24/7 for all things Wisconsin football, and then USCfootball.com for everything that you need to know about the Trojans. These two guys, their whole crews, they got you covered all season long.